Today on the Playbook Podcast, Trump is back in town, but he's not the only world leader who just spent some time in Asia, and we're less than 24 hours from that crucial November 1st shutdown milestone. Hello, I'm Megan Messerly.
And I'm Nick Taylor-Vaisey. It's Friday, October 31st. Happy Halloween, Megan.
Happy Halloween! It's a joyful time here in Washington. How is it where you are in Ottawa?
It's cold. I hate to talk about the weather and be a stereotypical Canadian, but I wore my winter coat today, and I'm not happy about it.
I'm so ready for winter, but it is a little bit more rough up there. So as you can hear, our dear friend and podcast host, Adam, was out in the pouring rain yesterday in New Jersey ahead of Election Day on Tuesday. He was doing some incredibly important reporting for you all that you can read in today's Playbook, but unfortunately, he got caught up in the perfect storm, literally, of bad weather and air traffic control shortages and could not make it to record the podcast. And so, as you can hear, we have a new face or voice on the Playbook Podcast with us this morning. So, joining us from up north is Nick Taylor-Vaisey, Politico's Ottawa Bureau Chief. So great to have you here, Nick.
Thank you for having me. Ottawa Bureau Chief and also Toronto Blue Jays mega fan.
Oh, yes. How could we forget? How could we forget? So now, Nick, you all just launched the Playbook Canada podcast this week, and I am already a fan. All of our listeners should definitely check it out. But there was this line you had in there that really stuck out to me, this idea that there's this like teacher is away energy in Ottawa. And I just thought that was so apt for how I was feeling this week in Washington. And that's, of course, because the man I cover, Donald Trump, and the man you cover, Mark Carney, were both in Asia this week making trade deals and securing investments, launching trade talks, which we will get into all of that in a second. But first, there was this really interesting detail as President Trump was flying back from South Korea. I almost didn't catch it. It was at the tail end of the president's gaggle with reporters on the flight home on Air Force One. And he was asked if he had anything to share on Canada. As our listeners probably know, things have not been going so well between our two countries over the last week or so. Everything has sort of devolved over this Reagan ad that Ontario put out, and Trump ended trade negotiations, threatened an additional 10% tariff. So the president was asked for an update on that. And he said, we had a very nice conversation with him last night. And he was referring to this APEC summit dinner. But of course, we don't exactly know what he said. He said we, and we're left to sort of assume maybe that includes Trump, and the him might be Mark Carney there. So sort of suggesting maybe the two men had some sort of interaction. We know they did the little finger guns at each other from across the table. Maybe there's a silver lining here. Maybe the two men are ready to reconcile. But Nick, what are you hearing in Ottawa? Where does that bilateral relationship stand from where you see it?
Well, I think at this point, finger guns is like a gift from Mark Carney because it is some sort of interaction with the president, who said he had no plans to speak to the Canadian prime minister. But there was this sort of like intense juxtaposition with whatever they were doing over there, as minimal as it may have been, and something that happened here at what is normally a pretty polite gala in Ottawa that celebrates, or supposed to celebrate, the two countries' relationship, the economic relationship. And in that room, Donald Trump's man in Ottawa, Pete Hoekstra, someone who's well known to your listeners from his years in Washington, gave a verbal dressing down to Doug Ford, Ontario Premier, Doug Ford's trade representative in Washington, who was also in town for the night. And David Patterson, the trade guy, is a corporate executive turned kind of quasi-diplomat. He doesn't really describe himself as a diplomat, but it's sort of what he is. He's kind of like Ontario's man now. And this made shockwaves. It happened in the room. Not a ton of people noticed, but enough noticed to talk to reporters about it. And so what you have this kind of like eruption in this room where it's supposed to be hunky-dory, and then overseas the two leaders, like our two dads, are overseas. And they're sort of maybe trying to make up, or we're not. It's just a strange time to figure out exactly what's going on.
It is. Yeah. Dads are overseas. Kids are fighting at home. Well, and I think that just kind of underscores the very different approach, right, that Mark Carney has taken in the wake of all of this. We've seen Doug Ford double down, say, the ad accomplished exactly what he hoped it would. Not clear exactly from talking to folks here what that is. It's not like it's changed Americans' minds on the tariff situation. What are you seeing from Mark Carney about this relationship and like the tone he's taking here with President Trump.
Mark Carney said something that was really, I thought, interesting in one of his first media appearances when he was overseas. He said, emotions don't get you very far in high stakes negotiations. And he's kind of playing the stoic Brit. I mean, he's Canadian, but he spent a lot of time in the United Kingdom. He was a citizen of that country until he renounced it when he became Prime Minister of Canada. So he's taking this deliberately kind of soft approach, treading lightly, while Doug Ford, the premier, is out there doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on his Reagan hat. And one of the questions we have here is how much Mark Carney is giving Doug Ford a little rope to do that, and how much they may be working together or not. We know they're pretty close. They hung out at Doug Ford's cottage over the summer, and Carney was over at his place recently in a suburb of Toronto, and so we know that they seem to get along quite well, much to the chagrin sometimes of some other provincial leaders who were watching this kind of like bromance unfold. But while he's over in Asia, Mark Carney is just kind of leaving Ford to be the fox in the henhouse.
We will see what happens when Mark Carney returns. But as you mentioned, he is still overseas. Donald Trump just returned last night. The man literally got off the plane, came back to the White House, and held a Halloween event at the White House where he was handing out candy to children. Like, the man literally never sleeps. But it was obviously this culmination to this whirlwind, Asia trip for President Trump. And obviously the thing that we're watching very closely was this meeting with President Xi of China. Just such a high stakes meeting given where the US-China relationship has been over the last year. There were a lot of concerns going into this meeting from China hawks here in Washington that, President Trump might sort of hand the keys to the kingdom over to China in the form of these advanced Blackwell chips. That didn't happen. We got some other details out of the meeting, though. China agreed to these soybean concessions. The U.S. agreed to take off this, not only the 100% tariffs that it was threatening, but an extra 10% after China said that it would take some action on fentanyl. So we saw sort of this movement to really de-escalate the tensions between the two countries. But the big thing that I was talking to folks about yesterday, and I think is going to be part of my reporting going forward, is, okay, one, what are the finer points of this deal? The president said that, the U.S. isn't giving away these Blackwell chips, but he said that there's going to be conversations between NVIDIA and China on chips. So what chips are being given away? We don't know that. And then we also just don't know how long-lasting this agreement is going to be, right? Another concern that I was hearing from folks going into this meeting was, China will adhere to a deal so long as it meets China's needs. What happens when that is no longer the case? The two countries said that these are terms sort of we're agreeing to for a year. But a lot of folks are that we're going to quite make it a year, as we've sort of seen these tumultuous trade threats from the president play out. So that obviously sort of capped off this whirlwind trip where the president also, met with the leaders of South Korea and Japan and talked about investments and secured commitments on critical minerals. But I was really interested because obviously your prime minister was in Asia as well, doing some of the similar things. And it struck me that, as tensions between the U.S. and Canada have been strained, it makes sense that Canada is turning to other folks to try to secure investments and commitments and strengthen those relationships where it can. So, what are you seeing out of the Prime Minister's trip in Asia?
Well, Mark Carney's not the first Canadian Prime Minister to try to diversify Canadian trade. For decades and decades and decades, Canada has been hugely dependent on American customers and also has bought a lot from the United States. Of course, it goes both ways. They always talk about the stats here, like the billions and billions of dollars that cross the bridges each day between Windsor, Detroit, Buffalo, Fort Erie. So he's not the first to try to expand the footprint. But he is maybe one of the first to do it because this feels like an existential moment. Like we can't rely as a country on the United States anymore. So there's an urgency to this trip that I think differentiates Mark Carney from Justin Trudeau before him, who went overseas plenty. He went to the ASEAN summit. He went to APEC at every opportunity. Stephen Harper before him. So conservative, liberal, whoever is in charge, it's always kind of been on the back burner. But Mark Carney recently said in 10 years, Canada should double non-U.S. exports. So that's an aggressive goal, and he needs to sign trade deals and find customers in a lot of new countries. So he went over and talked to leaders, Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, Korea, signed a defense and security pact with Korea. He feels like, I think this is sort of like a now or never moment, maybe, just because of the way the president talks about and the way that Canada and the way that Canada-U.S. relationship is evolving. But he also, we can talk a bit about this. We're recording this sort of in the dead of night, so the meeting hasn't happened yet. But Carney has this high stakes meeting also with Xi. No Canadian leader has spoken to the Chinese president in years. The diplomatic and economic relationship between Canada and China has been on the rocks for a while. There are tariffs between the two countries right now. And so he's going to fly home hoping to have a win out of that meeting, because that's it's an important one. It's one that a lot of people are going to be watching.
I just think about sort of like this geopolitical scramble that's happening, around these two summits, first the ASEAN summit and then the APEC summit in South Korea. It has just this fascinating moment in geopolitics. I just think about, you have China in the region just trying to shore up its dominance, and then you have other countries coming in like the US, like Canada, coming in wanting to make it so that China is not sort of this dominant force, or at least chip away at that a little bit, because both of our countries have very fractured, fragile relationships with China, and it's a challenging time in that region. And so I think it's just really interesting to me to see how the US is swooping in to try to secure, for instance, critical minerals commitments from Malaysia, when Malaysia also works with China on critical minerals, right? It's this sort of chipping away at these relationships here and there, and I think that's it sounds like that's what we're seeing from Mark Carney as well.
Yeah, I mean, from the Canadian side, let me tell you, the idea that Trump is negotiating with anybody, whatever the deal is, and however soft the deal is, Canadians are raring to go back to that bargaining, back to that negotiating table. Dominic LeBlanc, the lead minister on the file, Kirsten Hillman, the ambassador, who took the stage herself alone at that gala I mentioned, because Pete Hoekstra did not join her for a joint toast. She's in Washington, of course. She wants to negotiate. So they're waiting for the phone to ring.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I wanted to turn a little bit closer to home. So I'm curious, I just wanted to start off, is the government shutdown we're experiencing here in Washington, is that resonating across the border for you all?
Well, I'll tell you one micro example of this, because I'm sure there are all kinds of examples. But at that gala, I spoke to an American diplomat who was sort of in the general vicinity of Ambassador Hoekstra. And I just said, how's life right now? And with the shutdown, you're working right now. He said, yeah, but he's not getting paid. The diplomats aren't getting paid. And this is a rather, I'm not in their office, but I would suggest that over at the embassy, it's a rather tense week to try to sort of smooth relations, interpersonal or otherwise. And that's our little window into this shutdown here, is that these people are working without a paycheck.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a good microcosm of, I think, what we're seeing in Washington. While President Trump has obviously been over in Asia, meeting with all of these foreign leaders, getting to go to imperial palaces and all of that, Americans here have been really grappling with the real world consequences of that shutdown, which includes these roughly 650,000 federal workers who have been furloughed. That's according to the Congressional Budget Office. And then tens of thousands more are reporting to work but not being paid, like you're mentioning there. Those are the consequences that we've already seen, and things are about to get a lot worse. And so SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which most folks probably know as food stamps, is set to expire on Saturday, putting food aid in jeopardy for 42 million Americans. Open enrollment also starts on the health insurance exchange here. People are already grappling with sticker shock when they're looking at these expired subsidies that made their health plans, hundreds of dollars cheaper. So people are really starting to feel the effects, or will, starting tomorrow, start to feel even more the effects of this shutdown. And I think it just sort of underscores this very pivotal moment that we're at as President Trump returns home to confront this crisis. How much longer can this go on? There was this really interesting Washington Post, ABC News, Ipsos poll. And what it said is that more Americans blame President Donald Trump and Republicans in Congress than Democrats for the nearly month-long government shutdown. And so this is, I think, just shows the political vulnerability here for Republicans, as they've been really trying to make this case to the American people that this is Democrats' fault for forcing this shutdown. But they're getting blamed too. My colleague Maya Ward had this really great story last night about the sort of shutdown mess that Trump returns home to. And she talked to the senior administration official who said that any bipartisan meeting with the president, so between the president and congressional Democrats, is, quote, a Democratic fantasy. So they are not rushing to the negotiating table. They have stuck by this line that Democrats need to vote to reopen the government first before we can talk healthcare subsidies, before we can talk about any of this. Vice President J.D. Vance was, of course, at the White House on Thursday to meet with aviation industry leaders, and he was warning of a potential meltdown of the aviation industry, as air traffic controllers miss additional paychecks and we head into the holidays. I mean, it's just a really messy situation. And I just think about, in Washington, I think we can sort of get wrapped up in the political stakes of all of this, but there are just real lives that are at stake here and that are being impacted by this.
We have our own kind of drama coming or not coming, depending on how the chips fall here, not to do with appropriations, but to do with the survival of the government. The government is tabling. Sorry, tabling has a different meaning in the United States than it does in
Yes.
In our playbook, we say unveiling. They're unveiling their annual budget next week. And that's going to be put to a vote. And if Mark Carney's side doesn't have enough votes, he has only a minority of seats in the House of Commons. So if he loses that vote, potentially we're going to an election. So all the drama here will be election or not. But the interesting thing is, as much as that's the drama that we have, we never, ever, it's just not in the culture here. And it's procedurally, I think, it'd be very difficult to starve the government of funding in the same way. That often will happen in your neck of the woods. And it's so jarring to see it happen because it's not part of the rhythm of politics here.
Yeah, and it's become more of the rhythm here. We're not at the longest shutdown yet, but we're getting up there. We just sort of have, I think, maybe in America, become a little bit inoculated to how strange it is for the government to shut down. But seeing it through your eyes, it must be, very, very jarring or striking to see.
Even more jarring would be if there is an election and we're all following candidates around in a Canadian winter before Christmas. That would be
oh gosh,
the unlikely conclusion to this, but it's on the table.
I don't wish that on any of you, Nick. I don't. Well, Nick, to finish us off today, I wanted to chat about one of my favorite parts of the Playbook Canada podcast, which is the 200-second interview. I love that. So I was curious, aside from Prime Minister Mark Carney, who is your dream 200-second interview guest?
And this is, I think, both an obvious and boring, but also fascinating answer because I would say Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative leader. The man who was almost prime minister less than a year ago, until Justin Trudeau decided that his time was up. Mark Carney stormed into office and all of a sudden was prime minister. And Pierre Poilievre, the putative frontrunner for like a year and a half, was left still as leader of the opposition. He's an interesting guy. He doesn't do a ton of interviews. He'll pop up on podcasts now and again. I've never gotten the chance to put quirky questions to the man. And the 200-second interview, I think the bedrock of that is getting people not exactly out of their comfort zone, but kind of a little more, let's say this, a little less talking pointy. And that would be a fun challenge. So I'd love to do that.
Absolutely.
Aside from President Donald Trump, I'm curious, who would be your dream 200-second interview?
That's a great question. So I feel like there are a bunch of like serious, legitimate answers I could give. I mean, one of them would be Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, just because she's so behind the scenes, man behind the curtain. But I have a bit of a fun one. Something kind of caught my eye yesterday when I was reading through the pool reports that reporters send on the president during his travels. And there was this one that said the pilot who flew Air Force One back to Washington said that they had traveled for 41 hours total on this trip, covering 20,027 miles as the plane circumnavigated the globe. So literally DC to the UK, to Qatar, to Malaysia, to Japan, to South Korea, to Alaska, and back to DC, like literally doing the whole globe. That just got me thinking, like, what must it be like to be a pilot on Air Force One? Like, I can only imagine the stories they would have to tell.
Yeah, that's a far more interesting pick. Many more interesting stories, I think. Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for being here. That is all for today's Playbook podcast. We have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, which you can find at politico.com/playbook. We will be back on Monday. Have a great weekend.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.